Before today's episode, a quick message. This is Mark, and I'm the creator of Lantern Podcasts. I'm really looking to talk with more of our listeners to get a sense of what you honestly like and dislike about these shows. So if you'd like to chat, please shoot me an email at hello@lanternpodcasts.com, and I'd love to speak with each and every one of you. Thanks. Now on today's episode.
Dan Osborn just outraised a sitting senator in Nebraska, and the forecasters didn't budge an inch. This is Senate Pickup Watch. I'm Margot, Theo's here, and today we actually have a number on the board, instead of just campaign season fog.
Q1 money versus a Cook solid R rating. One of those is telling the truth, and figuring out which one is the whole game today.
NBC's also out with this multiple paths to a majority piece, and it flattens Nebraska, Texas, and Montana into the same bucket. We're going to break that apart before it hardens into gospel. Here's Juan Salinas II at Nebraska Examiner.
Lincoln. Registered nonpartisan U.S. Senate candidate Dan Osborn outraised incumbent Republican U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts, a former two-term governor, by roughly $200,000 in the first quarter. But Ricketts remains ahead in the total raised and campaign cash on hand. Osborn's campaign raised $1.2 million in the first 3 months of the year, while Ricketts raised roughly $1 million for his campaign.
Okay, the Nebraska Examiner has the Q1 numbers, and Osborn did outraise Pete Ricketts. That's the first hard ledger item this cycle that clears my floor. And yes, Ricketts still has the cash-on-hand edge overall, so keep that caveat in view.
And Cook still has Nebraska at solid R. So the challenger outraises the incumbent in Q1, and the rating world barely blinks. One of those signals is off, and I want to know which one.
What I want to know is where Osborn's money is coming from. Outraising Ricketts matters, but if it's national progressive dollars chasing the labor hero story, that's a very different thing from Nebraska donors writing the checks. The donor mix tells you whether this is a campaign or a cause.
Right, and NBC is out there this week talking about multiple paths through red terrain, like Nebraska, Texas, and Montana are all the same race. Osborn's independent run is structurally nothing like a conventional Democratic pickup attempt, and pretending it is just sends national money to the wrong place.
From NBC News.
Democrats believe they now have multiple paths to flipping the Senate this year, touting strong recruits in some deep red states and a message focused on costs and health care. And, for the first time, the party's Senate campaign arm is outlining its top targets.
NBC is out with the DSCC's official target list, and the pitch is multiple paths to a majority, all of them winding through red territory. Fine. Which of those campaigns actually has a precinct operation that can pull it off?
And this is the part that bugs me. It's collapsing Nebraska, Texas, Montana into one genre called red state pickup. Osborn's independent run is structurally nothing like a conventional Democratic recruit in Texas. Putting them in the same press release is aesthetics, not strategy.
We now have Osborn outraising Ricketts in Q1, and that's the first hard number this week that gets above my floor. Cook still has Nebraska at solid R. One of those two signals is wrong, and I can tell you which one the DSCC wants to believe.
Right, and outraising an incumbent in Q1 of a midterm cycle is real. But it is not a November coalition. If national money floods Nebraska because the fundraising headline looks shiny, they could undercut the one thing that makes Osborn viable. He didn't come out of the party machine.
Here's Cook Political Report.
Cindy Burbank overwhelmingly won the Democratic primary for Senate, but is expected to decline the party's nomination in favor of independent candidate Dan Osborn's bid to challenge Republican Senator Pete Ricketts.
Cook still has this race at solid R as of April 13th. That rating hasn't moved one tick. And now Osborn has Q1 fundraising that topped Ricketts. Those two data points are not supposed to coexist.
And the Burbank situation is basically settled. She overwhelmingly won the Democratic primary and is expected to step aside for Osborn, which clears the structural mess I flagged earlier. That matters because now Osborn isn't fighting a ballot access war anymore. He's fighting Pete Ricketts with more Q1 cash than the incumbent.
Right, but Cook's R plus 10 PVI for Nebraska is still sitting there on the page. The forecasters are looking at the electorate. The ledger is looking at the first quarter. One of those has to give by October, and historically it is not the structural rating.
Ricketts won his last general with 62.6%. That's the number Cook is anchoring to. Outraising him in Q1 is a real signal, but it doesn't erase that margin by itself. I want to see where the Osborn money is actually coming from before I start calling this the surprise pickup I've been circling all week.
Got a race you think deserves more attention? Or a correction we should make? Send feedback and story ideas to Senate Pickup Watch at lanternpodcasts.com. We read what comes in, and it helps shape the show. We've put links to all the stories we covered today in the show notes, so if anything stood out, you can follow it there and read a little deeper. That's Senate Pickup Watch for this Friday. This is a Lantern podcast.